Hi, this is Real Estate FAQ with me, Russ Bradchulis, realestatewithruss.com and Keller Williams Realty. Today's video is about contingencies and how contingencies work. So what is a contingency? A contingency is a condition in a purchase and sale agreement that stipulates how the transaction will move forward. And there are three main examples of this. A financing contingency, which says, as long as I can get a loan, the transaction will move forward. An inspection contingency, which says, as long as I'm satisfied with the inspection, the transaction will move forward. And then another one that is common is subject to the seller finding suitable housing, which says that the seller, as long as they can find suitable housing to move to, the transaction will move forward. So the contingencies are conditions under which the transaction will move forward. Now, let's go through those three contingencies and talk about them in a little bit more detail. So the financing contingency will typically have three parts to it. One, it will say, I need to have this much of a loan commitment by this date. So it will say, I have to have the commitment by that certain date. It will also tell you the amount of the commitment. So it will reflect if they're getting a 10, 20, 30% down kind of loan, and it will tell them the date by which they need to have that commitment in order for the transaction to proceed. And then lastly, they will have usually a date for when they have to apply for the loan, saying that if they don't apply for it by this date, then the transaction's not going to move forward. Now on the inspection contingency, you'll typically have two dates. One date is when the actual inspection will take place. The second date is usually 1 to 3 days after that, by which the buyer will need to respond to the seller and say, yes, we're moving forward, or no, we'd like to have these things paid for, and actually have that conversation with the seller or the seller's agent about what needs to be addressed after the inspection. And then lastly, on the suitable housing kind of contingency, there's not usually a date associated with that, although you may find it that the seller has to be actively looking or something along those lines, but you're typically not going to be finding a date in that kind of a contingency. Now, the last two tips when we're talking about contingencies. Make sure, as you should always be doing when you're dealing with a contract for real estate, that you have local, competent legal advice to work through all of the ins and outs and all of the terms of every kind of contingency that could exist. And then you'll want to make sure that you pay attention to what happens to your deposit regarding the contingencies. Some of the contingencies will give you the deposit back. Sometimes they'll keep a portion of the deposit. So again, make sure you have that local, competent legal advice so that you know exactly what's happening with your money as the buyer, and also when you're entitled to that money as a seller if the contingency dates are not met. Thanks so much for watching. This is Russ Bradchulis with realestatewithruss.com and Keller Williams Realty and the Real Estate FAQ.